This is the side lying abduct and shift with grounding. What we're gonna do is first make sure we can set up optimally, because that's the biggest part of this, honestly. This is a really effective technique, but if we aren't set up right, then we're not gonna be successful. So we gotta make sure that we have a couple of key things in place here. The first is that we have a pillow underneath our head, and it should be big enough to where we're very slightly side bent up towards the ceiling. So we have a little bit of a curvature in the neck right there. Not much at all, maybe just 5-10 degrees. It's not gonna feel like much to you, but that's an important part of what we're trying to accomplish, integrating the whole body from head to toe. We also have a little towel roll underneath the lowest ribs on the down side there. That's going to serve as a reference for you to use your abs effectively later in the exercise. It doesn't need to be much, just a little bit underneath the lowest ribs, so that way the hip on the bottom side can still be on the floor. A common setup mistake we will see with this is people will oftentimes have that bottom side arm up there and shrugged, whereas if we're gonna get a little bit of separation right here and we want to use our left abs like we will in this exercise, then we want to have that left shoulder tucked under us a little bit, at minimum stacked with that top shoulder right there. We also have a bench or some object, it doesn't matter really what it is, as long as it's keeping you in a position of slight abduction, meaning that your foot is ever so slightly higher than your hip. Now, you could use a slightly higher or lower surface depending on how much abduction you have in your hip, and you can measure that separately on your own, or we may do it for you, but the point is that you need to have a straight line from your heel to your hip, to your shoulder, to your head. Now, for most people, because you're in a hip extended position, it's gonna feel like your leg is a little bit behind you, but in reality, it is actually just in line with your body. Now, this left side or the down side, whatever side you're doing it on, is gonna be, if this was a perfect 90-degree angle right here from his hip, he will have slightly less than that. And the important part of this downside is that we have some sort of external reference or object for the foot to be against something. So we have this step right here, it's up against the wall, so that way when Trevor presses his heel into it, he can feel a little bit of grounding and foot reference there. It's not 100% necessary if you don't have any way you can set it up, but it does really help quite a bit. So if you can set it up, awesome. If not, then there might be a way you can do it without that aspect. So what we're gonna do to start is first make sure we have that straight line from the right heel or top heel to the head. Now Trevor's gonna just get a nice gentle exhale through his mouth, fully, full, maybe 5 to 6 second exhale. He's gonna feel his rib cage just come down. That's gonna stack his ribs over his hips. Now what he's gonna do is just very gently roll the right hip forward, so that way now everything is aligned still, but this right hip is square and parallel with the wall ahead of him. So he's not rolled out, but not so far to where it's not parallel anymore, just right about there. As he does that, he should feel a tiny bit of his right outside hip, like his glute med engage. And then we're going to further facilitate that by getting Trevor to reach this right leg away from him. And that's going to have him also get the inside edge of his foot pushed away, which is E version of the foot. So Trevor, if we can show them one more time. This action right here is what you're looking for. Okay, to summarize, we have a straight line from the heel to the hip, to the shoulder, to the head. At this point, all we should really feel is the right outside hip and potentially a little bit of side abs as well. Because if you notice, Trevor, you can come back to the starting position right here. As Trevor reaches that right leg away from him, he should be able to feel a little mouse tunnel underneath these lowest left ribs right here. And if he needs to push his top hand into the ground a little bit, that's okay. And that should help him find a little bit of left obliques or downside obliques. And this is the first step of the exercise. All you need to be able to do is maintain that straight line and feel your downside side abs with your top side glute med or side of the butt cheek. And if you can do that, great. Just sit here for a couple of breaths. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, making sure you're keeping heel contact on this object right here with your downside foot. The most common mistake in this version of the exercise is that as people roll that top hip slightly forward and reach this leg away, they're gonna move through their low back and extend their low back. Remember, we are in hip extension, but we don't want the back to arch. So if this is you, I'd strongly recommend further emphasizing that full exhale at the beginning and feeling your ribs come down and holding that as you roll that hip over very subtly and slightly and then reaching that leg away from you. Doing that should really limit how much movement you have through your low back. Finally, the thing to watch out for is using this top right leg to push down into that bench and lift your hip off for whatever reason. You should feel your right outside hip, not your right inner thigh. If you're feeling any right groin, that's not good, and that indicates you're pushing down. So you may need to use a lower object here, or just emphasize more of this arch reaching away from you. Okay, now I know that was a lot. We totally get that, but I want to give you the key points to think about, and that is straight line from here to here to here to here, rolling that top hip slightly forward and keeping the rib cage down. If you can do that, you're going to have some success. It's just really important that you feel only your downside side abs and your top side glute med area. If you're doing that, you're doing great. And as long as your neck and low back are relaxed, those are the key points. As a progression from this, everything will stay the exact same. But the only thing we're gonna do is keeping heel contact on that downside right there. We're gonna focus on just ever so slightly having the intention to lift this bottom side knee off of the ground. The hip stays on the ground, but just 1 millimeter of a lift of that bottom side knee is gonna really kick on your inner groin adductor muscle on, in this case, the left side, but he should not lose his downside side abs or that top side glute med area. If he does, he's probably trying too hard to lift that knee up. Some people won't even be able to lift the knee up, but the intention to lift the knee is all they need to feel that inner thigh adductor muscle engaged. Just remember, don't lose that heel.